Hi everyone! My very first RCT video I made was a tutorial on making railings for diagonal paths when only using non-custom scenery. Although it was a decent video for its time, some years have passed since then and I think it's time to revisit this technique. OpenRCT2 has changed a little since then, and I found some new ideas that can make diagonal paths look better and easier to build. So let's take a look. Just to reiterate what our goal is for this is for when you want to have some nice aesthetics in a sandbox park. We want to build a path network that has some nice organic look to it. We want it to look more flowy and not locked into the grid so much. As an example of what we're aiming for, well, you've been looking at it. The first park in OpenRCT2's current title sequence is Grand Glacier, which has a lot of good examples of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Also, as a reminder, everything we're going to be doing here can be done more easily and looking nicer if you want to use custom scenery objects. Some people prefer to use non-custom scenery, myself included, so tricks like this are a good way to stick with the classic RCT graphics look, but also move past the jaggy grid at the same time. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's start building. Alright, so just a little refresher on making those diagonal paths. If you didn't see the original video, or if you need a little refresher, we're going to start by just building ourselves a nice path here with the tarmac path as an example. We'll include a few different gradations here of diagonalness. So if you were to build a path like this in RCT, obviously we're on a grid, so you've got lots of jaggies in here. Not ideal, and you maybe want your sandbox park to look a little bit nicer. So we're gonna start by doubling this path. This is a thing I didn't do in the original, but definitely should have. It's gonna look a lot nicer with double wide paths, especially if you're going to be filling in the diagonals here. It's gonna make things look a little bit smoother. Single wide diagonal path can be done. It looks a little bit janky though, and we'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. So the easiest way to smooth out the corners of this path is we're going to dig ourselves some holes next to all of these inside corners, and we're going to fill them in with the steel block here from the mechanical theming. And if we color it black, you can see that it's about the same shade here as the tarmac path. You'll want to make sure that clearance checks are disabled for this in the cheats menu up here. And then if you place a block here, hold shift, you can move it down so it's flush with the surface right here. And then if you've got more holes dug out, you can hold control over here and easily snap it into place in anywhere that you've got a hole dug out. So where exactly you put these diagonal pieces is up to you. They do affect the perceived width of the path, and this will become more apparent as we finish this out. So sometimes I like to actually make it so that the path is only one tile wide in certain junctures. So we'll move that piece there instead, because if you include these scenery pieces, it's going to make the whole thing look kind of the same width all the way throughout. We want the whole thing to look as if it's about 2 tiles wide the whole way. And actually, we're going to need to delete quite a few of these pieces, I think, in order to make that work. So in order to make this path match the straight path, it's going to be one tile of jaggies all throughout, and then we'll have our steel blocks here on the outside corners. So I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of the path here. All right, so that's step one. Next, we have to fill in all the gaps here. As you can see, we've obviously got a nice strip of green between our tarmac and our scenery pieces. Definitely don't want that. It looks pretty terrible. So we're going to do something called proxy pathing. And what that means is we're going to create a fake layer of path on top of this lower level of path. This is something I've talked about in my previous videos. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on proxy pathing, there is a video on the tile inspector that goes over this in a lot more detail. I'll have a link to that in the description of this video if you want to know a little bit more about how all that works. But suffice it to say for now that there is actually a plugin that will do this for us. So we're going to be using the Proxy Pather plugin made by Bassy. As usual, there will be a link to this in the description. It's kind of an old plugin, but it does the job. Still works as well as it has done for years. And this is going to do that proxying for us, so we don't have to mess about with the tile inspector to get this done. So all we're going to do is we're going to open the plugin. The Proxify button is going to be selected for us, and we're just going to click on any of these path pieces that are next to one of our triangular scenery blocks. And what that has done is that it has now placed a fake piece of path over top of the real path. So if you look in the tile inspector, you can now see the surface element at the bottom. We have our real path. The original path piece we placed down here is now invisible. And we have another piece of path on top of it, which has connections on all of its edges. So it's going to be flush with the scenery pieces that we've placed before. Now there's still a couple areas where the Proxy plugin doesn't quite make things look perfect. For example, any of these junctions where we go from diagonal to straight, things look a little bit strange. For example, this piece here has got a connected edge over here, whereas the pieces next to it don't. A couple things you could do with that. You could either manually disconnect the edges in here to make that look a little bit more consistent. I'll do the same over here with this piece. Alternatively, you could proxy the entire path so that all of the pieces here are full tile size. Personally, I'm not as big of a fan of doing it that way because it makes editing the path later a little bit more difficult, and sometimes it can mess with pathfinding in certain circumstances. Better to not risk it, I feel like, but that's personal preference. Maybe for a small area like this where we've only got one piece of tile that's different, you could use the plugin on this piece, even though it's not connected to a scenery piece, just to make that look more consistent. And I'll do the same for this one down here. Again, it's up to you what you want to do. We'll change this one down here as well. So the net effect here is that we've got one continuous looking piece of path that looks like it's about the same width the whole way. Obviously you can't get it looking exactly perfect. We're still constrained to a grid, but this is gonna do for now. And if you zoom out, it looks pretty smooth. Now you can tell it's maybe a little bit thicker here in this diagonal section, but for the most part, it looks nice and smooth, a little bit flowy. Now, of course, this doesn't just work with tarmac path. There are other kinds of footpaths in the game, and some of them work better than others for this. I'm a big fan of the crazy paving footpath, as you might be aware. Unfortunately, none of these scenery pieces in the game work quite as well as the mechanical steel block does with tarmac. What I usually see used for crazy paving, what I usually use is this triangular piece here. It's just called block, but it's the one that's triangular shaped. It's got stripes on it. And if you color it brown, it mostly looks like the same. It's got a pretty similar tonal feel to it. If we go ahead and proxy, it works pretty well. You can definitely tell a difference between the two textures, between the stripy scenery piece and the cobblestone crazy paving. But for non-custom scenery objects, I feel like this is probably as good as you're gonna get. Of course, there are a lot more types of footpath in the game as well. I don't use most of the other ones quite as much. The brown footpath here is probably the next one I would want to look at. I don't have a scenery piece off the top of my head that I think would work well with this. Unfortunately, there isn't any other triangular shaped piece of scenery in the vanilla game besides the two that we looked at so far. It would be really nice if there was a flat version of this triangular piece. But if you color it now with the new umber, the darkest brown that we have, it works okay. It stands out a little bit more than the crazy paving, but if you need something, that works pretty well. For the other footpath types, I don't have anything specific in mind, but I'm sure you can come up with some ideas if you wanted to play around with those and see what works. The next thing I want to talk about is the diagonal railings. And this is the part of the tutorial where things are going to deviate a lot from the last video. The technique that I used back there works well, and it still works, but I found one that I think is a little bit easier to use, and it's gonna come up with some designs that I think look a little bit nicer as well. So the concept is still gonna be very similar. We're gonna be taking a track ride here and using it to build some railings. And let's go ahead and start with the suspended monorail. This is always a good one to use. And I'm gonna start by trying to build a railing along this edge of the path here. So we're gonna start by putting down our monorail over here, a little far away from where we wanna go. And I'm gonna lower it down into the ground a bit by 2 units so that the track appears to be flush with the surface of the ground. And then we're gonna start building towards our path here, and we're gonna make a diagonal turn and then build straight. And as you can see, the path is now flush with the track here. And if we look at all the angles here, the track is right along the middle of the tile, and it's gonna be right in line with our scenery pieces. And when we get to the end, instead of building straight, we're going to build another large corner here going this way. Then we can delete these ones here at the end, and we'll keep this one going straight back that way. And I'm gonna use this as a brick wall, so we're going to color it so that the base is sepia, another new color, but one that works well for this, and the top will be white. And I'm gonna make the supports invisible. Actually, the sepia looks a little bit darker than I thought it was going to. We switch it to salmon. Let's switch it to salmon for now. Might change it back later. Might just be my monitor, not really sure. So what we have here is we have our diagonal brick wall here going across the edge of the path. And to finish up for just this section, we're going to open up the tile inspector. I've got a shortcut Control T to open it up. And I'm gonna click on these pieces of the track that are overlapping the existing path. And I'm gonna go ahead and make those invisible by clicking the little eye icon. Or I also have a keyboard shortcut for that too, which is gonna be even easier. And so now we have just the track going across the diagonal part of the path here. And we can open up our scenery tab and we can add in some brick walls here. I'll put them like this, and there you go. It's not a perfect match, but again, for non-custom scenery objects, I think this works really well. The reason I like this better than the original version is that now we have these curved shapes for the track here at the ends of the diagonal section, and that is going to make it look more like the track is curving along the shape of the path, helping give it more of that organic, flowy look I was talking about earlier, making things look a little bit more naturally curved. Whereas before we just had straight pieces of diagonal track and they would always have a very sharp, distinct angle where it switched from the track to the scenery pieces. This, it's a little bit more subtle. It makes it blend a little bit better. It's not really the thing you would notice immediately if you were looking at it, but I really think it helps give this a much nicer look. So earlier when I was talking about making the ends of these curves invisible, you could delete them if you wanted to, but I think making them invisible is going to be a lot more convenient in the long run, because you can still right click on this track and build off of it. If you need a new piece, you can get a new straight piece right there, copy it, paste it, use it elsewhere. Whereas if you were to delete those pieces of track directly, you wouldn't be able to use the construction menu anymore to edit this fence, and you'd have to use the tile inspector to delete all the pieces of track and start over from scratch. So just keep things invisible instead of deleting them. It's gonna make things a lot easier. Just having this whole fence be editable compared to the original version where they were all copied and pasted, it was all hacked. Now you can, if you want to reroute this path, you can very easily tear this fence down, rebuild it somewhere else. It's very convenient. So I'm going to keep working on the rest of this path. We're going to, again, copy this straight piece of track here, and we've pasted over here. We can make another diagonal piece. And since this one is only one tile wide, we can go straight from one curve to curving back in the other direction. It's actually going to connect to our original track, which is kind of neat. And I'll do the same for this piece here. We'll make another curve and then curve the opposite direction. And I can go ahead and delete these straight pieces. We don't need them for right now. And then I will make the ends of these pieces invisible with the tile inspector. And we can continue to use these brick walls to fill out the rest of our curb. Of course, we have a little bit of glitching with these particular walls because they're not meant to be stuck underground like this, but one way to fix it for now is just use the tile inspector, move them above the surface, and that will fix the glitching for now. You can also put scenery pieces in front of them. I believe if you put a bush in front like that, that'll prevent most of the glitching. It doesn't always work perfectly, but just for now, we'll hide them above the surface. So there you go. I think that's a pretty nice looking brick curb. Again, pretty easy to build once you get the basics down. Once you get in the groove of it, you know where to start the pieces, copying and pasting them to the right tiles to line them up correctly with your existing path. Pretty easy to do. This is also probably a case where if you are going to be putting in curb here, you probably will want to proxy the rest of this path here just so it's flush with your walls. Probably will look a little bit nicer that way, but that's always up to you. Also, just a quick recap in case you wanted to use the original technique. It is still valid, it does still work. So what the original technique I used in the original video is to copy and paste these bits of diagonal track and just place them so that they visually line up with the edges of your path. So I'm going to just do that here for this edge. I'm going to copy this highlighted track piece here with the tile inspector. And then if we go to this tile here, we'll go ahead and paste, and then we'll have to move the base height up a little bit by 2 units. And then we can copy and paste that piece all along the edge here. And now if we add in our walls like we did on the other side, you can see it looks pretty similar, but instead you have a pretty sharp corner here instead of the more natural looking curve you had with the original solution. And then you have to do it from the other side as well, because since these are diagonal track pieces, they only show up from one angle. So you have to do the same thing for all 4 angles, which is why I don't like doing it this way anymore. At least the tile inspector makes it pretty easy if you've got shortcuts set up, and there's some of those supports. So another reason why I wouldn't necessarily want to do it this way, you have visible supports. If I color these just so they're a bit more obvious, you have to either hide these by moving the track pieces underground or putting a bush in front of them, whatever. And then you get a little bit more glitching here. Like this wall right here, you've got one column of pixels here that is a little annoying. I hate seeing glitches like that, and you can just throw a bush in front of it or whatever, hide most of it, but just having built that all in the first place is annoying. There's still probably valid reasons why you'd want to use this original strategy if you wanted to have a very solid, flat wall that doesn't curve at all. Sure, there's plenty of reasons to build it that way. Not my preference though. But again, it still works, so if you want to do it this way, you can. Just, yeah, copying and pasting these diagonal pieces with the tile inspector will get you what you want if you want to do it that way. All right, moving on. So there are other kinds of walls you might want to build, other kinds of railings, not just brick curves. And we do have a lot of different options that we can do with the tools given to us in vanilla RCT2 with non-custom scenery. So I'm going to go through a couple other track types you might be interested in using that work in different ways, might get you some different aesthetics, different materials, different textures. So another good ride type to use is the single rail coaster. This is another one that I use pretty frequently. It has a very similar look to the suspended monorail coaster. It has the same sort of 2-color scheme that we can use. If you want a brick wall that is maybe a little bit shorter, it has a little bit of a slimmer look to it, just by a tiny bit. I think it matches these walls pretty well. Not a whole lot of difference between this and the suspended monorail. The texture is a little bit different. You get a couple pixels shorter of track. So very similar, but depending on what you want, might work well for you. Another good one is the mini suspended coaster. This one has a much more rounded appearance to the track, which means it's gonna look very good for the wooden post fences. So we're gonna do something similar here where we're going to bury underground a little bit. Because this one has a slightly different height to it than the suspended monorail does, I'm actually going to turn on the allow building at invalid heights cheat so I can build it flush against the ground. And if we give this a nice brown color and give it some invisible supports, this will match the wooden post fences pretty well from the Wild West theming. Another fence type that I tend to use quite a bit and I think usually looks pretty good. This is also nice if we double it up. So I'm going to build a straight piece here, use the tile inspector to move it up by 1 unit, and we're gonna build that piece of fence again. And we'll go ahead and hide the edges here. They don't quite have the same heights. It's not perfect, but at a glance, I think this looks really good. You can get a very nice wooden fence design with this. And of course, don't forget that you can raise and lower these pieces with the tile inspector as well. Make sure you check this apply changes to entire track piece checkbox, and you can raise and lower the base height of your track pieces here. So if we want to try doing it at a different height, you can do that. See if it looks a little bit better with them raised up by 1. That looks pretty good, actually. That looks like it fits a little bit better. So if you want them to match with the wooden post fence, yeah, don't make them flush against the ground. Maybe 1 unit up is going to work pretty well here. And like before, we're going to curve them in and out of the corners here, kind of following the path. So that way they look like they connect to the fences a lot more naturally. So yeah, pretty basic example, but if you make a more complex path with this, with more curves to it, it's gonna look pretty nice, especially once you accentuate it with some nice bushes and trees and foliage and buildings, all that good stuff. There's one classic ride type we haven't talked about yet. That's the Steeplechase. Definitely use this one a whole lot for fences. It's a pretty versatile track type. And just like with the other tracks we've done so far, you just build it along the corner of your path here. This one you can build right on the ground because the Steeplechase is not a suspended coaster type. So like the single rail, you can just put it right on the ground and it'll match up with your corner scenery pieces here very easily. There are a few different scenery pieces that will match the steeplechase well. What I usually like to do is double it up. So I have 2 steeplechase tracks stacked right on top of each other here. And you can do that by copying and pasting one of these straight pieces with the tile inspector, moving it up 1 unit, and then building along. Again, making sure that you have this enable building a track at invalid heights sheet turned on. This is pretty important to use for making these fences. But again, make sure you turn off when you're done because that sheet can be very dangerous. So if we hide the edges here for our steeplechase, this track type I feel like it works very well with the steel railings, making the same color. And not sure if the inside or outside of the tile is going to be best. You can play around with it and make your own decisions on there. And then maybe layering it with some abstract walls to match the horizontal parts of the track probably works pretty well. So yeah, something like that I think looks really good. Again, like I said before, making this into a larger structure, combining both the steeplechase track and the normal scenery fences can yield some pretty nice results. So definitely encourage playing around with this and coming up with some of your own designs. But this is just a basic example. But again, you can see how quickly I put this together. You know, slap down 1 piece of steeplechase track, build yourself some nice big diagonal curves. They line up really nicely with the path you've already built. Then you just hide the pieces that you don't want. It's pretty simple stuff. One more track type I want to point out specifically is the regular monorail. This one works very similar to the ones we've discussed so far. Nothing too unusual about this. It has a much thicker look to it, so this goes well with certain types of walls. And you can layer this one as high as you want if you want it to match up with maybe like a solid wall on a building or something like that. This will work pretty well for that. I'm not 100% sure what I would use this with necessarily. I haven't really done a whole lot of actual building with the monorail myself, but I'm sure you can come up with something that looks good if you put your mind to it. There's probably some good wall pieces in here that would match it well. Maybe if we paint it just plain white, we can make it work with just some regular flat wall. We stack some of these up, that might work pretty well. Something like that. Again, you know, it's all up to your artistic interpretation. Lots of things you could do with this. So I'm just presenting you some tools and you get to figure out how you want to use them. Lots and lots of different options. Also, it might be good to mix and match some of these posts in here as well. For example, with this steeplechase track, I usually like putting in some of these posts with my railings normally, even if they don't have special curves to them, but just putting some of these in here helps to add a little bit of extra weight to the wall, a little bit of extra structure to it, makes it look a little bit fuller. It's kind of out of scope for this tutorial. I'm sure you can figure out some other ways to make your fences look interesting, but just wanted to show off how you can use the different kinds of track to make them on the diagonal. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we have Grand Glacier here, the park used for the current title sequence. This is a fantastic park if you haven't had a chance to play around with it yourself. It's included in the OpenRCT2 download, but this is a good example of all the different techniques I've talked about so far to make some nice looking curvy railings for your paths. So you can see up here at the front near this large building, we have some of the monorail track here. This is the suspended monorail used to make some flower bed edges. Just a little curve here, and then next to the brick wall, can look really nice. And then here in the Glacier fountain area near the front of the park, same thing we have going on. You can see we have, these are curves here that are still buildable with the normal build tools. This is just a loop of track here. If I hide the scenery, you can see as I cycle through the track here, it's just one big circle and the edges of it have been made invisible so that you can have some flat scenery pieces here instead. You won't see the track through the path. Pretty simple, but I think it's pretty effective and I think it can work really well in certain circumstances. This park also does a really good job of layering different fence types on top of each other to build structures that look even more interesting. And there's quite a lot of them in here. I wanted to specifically to point out these here near the front. Let's see if I can find a good example. So right here, there are 3 different track types going on, and they've been stacked on top of each other. So at the bottom here, we have our standard suspended monorail. On top of that, we have an alpine coaster, and on top of that is a single rail coaster that has been painted half invisible. And 3 different track types going in the same direction, the same shape of track, all at slightly different heights. the suspended monorail painted in this sepia, and then the Alpine in black and a single rail coaster in gray. And that is in order to match these railing pieces here, the ones with the brick base and wrought iron fence on top. It's not a perfect match, but for non-custom scenery, I think this works really well. I think it looks really good. It's a nice approximation of making that railing piece with track, so you can have it in curved shapes, diagonal shapes, and it gives the path a nice curvy feel to it. So just to show real quick how I would do that, again, you're gonna see pretty much the same thing we've been doing for the rest of the video here, but I'm gonna go ahead and build me our suspended monorail here. We're gonna lower it underground so that it's flush with the surface. I'm gonna color that sepia and invisible supports. Then we're gonna go ahead and grab an Alpine roller coaster. And since we have the invalid heights sheet turned on, I can raise this up by 1 unit, and then we'll follow the same path here. We'll color this black with invisible supports. And then on top of that, we'll do our single rail. And we'll make this one, I believe it was gray invisible, and then gray with invisible supports. And then like before, we'll find all of our track pieces, make those invisible with the tile inspector. And then we can grab our railing piece and stick it here in front and make the rest of these track pieces invisible. And there you go. At a glance, you can't really even tell that it's track pieces, especially if you're zoomed out, it blends in really nicely. You get a nice diagonal bit from all angles. You build it once and it looks good from every side. Unlike the old strategy, you don't have to copy and paste a whole bunch. So really easy to do, and I think it looks great. So yeah, I think that about covers everything I know about making diagonal railings with OpenRCT2. Hopefully these techniques are a little bit easier to use than the ones from my previous video. Like I said, I think with practice, it becomes pretty easy to make these and fit them organically into any sandbox park. As always, if you have any questions about this, or if you've got suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.